Morning.
So much to talk about this morning. Just when you think the Conservative Party can't get themselves in any more hot water, we find out that Lee Anderson has the whip suspended. He did an interview. He gave his personal opinion on various things. They've removed the whip. Did they do the right thing?
I think politically they didn't have much choice by the end. It wasn't just Labour MPs who were criticising him. Quite a lot of high-profile Conservatives, including ministers, were going on social media, making clear they were very unhappy with what Lee Anderson had said. Now, he was obviously given the opportunity to apologise. The statement put out yesterday by the Chief Whip, Simon Hart, was that he was being suspended and having the whip removed for refusing to apologise. So clearly, the inference there is, had he apologised for what he said, then presumably he would have got to keep the whip. So he was given an opportunity. He wouldn't take that opportunity, and then the consequences followed. Now, he put out a statement, Lee Anderson, afterward, basically saying it's a fair cop. I understand the party had no other option, is how he put it, other than to remove the whip after he had had his discussions with the Chief Whip. So yeah, I don't think they had any option, really.
But when I'm reading the messages from everyone around the country, they are saying, where is the evidence that Anderson is wrong? What exactly has Khan done to counter Anderson's allegation? Khan supports the hate marches. He endorses a two-tier policing. He says nothing about the escalation of anti-Semitism in London. Labour has jumped on Anderson's comments to deflect them from corrupting the Speaker, which, as we know, happened, or at least the shenanigans in the House of Commons. Also, many people saying the same thing here. This is Chris in Norwich saying, at last, someone with a backbone to speak up about this problem within the country. Has the Conservative Party completely lost the plot in actually not understanding what the vast majority of people in this country think?
Well, one thing he says is that the central premise of Lee Anderson's comment was wrong. He said that Sadiq Khan had done nothing to stop the marches. Well, Sadiq Khan doesn't have the power to stop the marches. Thankfully, we don't live in a country where politicians get to decide who can and can't protest. It's up to the police. Now, we can have a separate debate as to whether or not the police, one, have enough powers, or two, are using the powers that they have at the moment sufficiently. But, you know, as I say, the central thrust of what Lee Anderson was saying was wrong. And not only that, you know, had he been, say, a Labour politician accusing a Jewish mayor of being, you know, in hock to Zionists, being controlled by Jewish people, which is pretty much what Lee Anderson was saying about the mayor and Islamists, then there would quite rightly be a huge outcry, and leading the charge, I'm sure, would be Rishi Sunak. So yeah, I think if you flip it on its head, then you can see why those comments that Lee Anderson made were so offensive. And really, as I say, I don't think the party had much choice.
So what do you think is going to happen to the polling on the back of this?
I mean, I'm not sure it'll really affect the headline polling at the moment. I mean, you could well see some voters come election day certainly being more inclined to vote Reform. I mean, I know that is something that the Conservatives are very concerned about, and I think that's probably why they gave Lee Anderson every opportunity to apologise and therefore not have to remove the whip from him. I mean, interestingly, on Friday night when this story really took off, I contacted the Conservative Party to see if they wanted to make any comment. And at that time, a senior source within the party was actually standing by Lee Anderson and sort of trying to put into context what he had said. So clearly the initial instinct of the party, I think, was to not cut Lee Anderson loose, because they know, as you know, the comments that you're receiving this morning show, that he does tap into a view that is out there among voters who the Conservatives want to vote for them come the election. So they gave him every opportunity, and I think rather reluctantly in the end, they removed the whip from him. So they realised the political jeopardy of doing so, because, you know, as I say, they are very worried about Reform. You've only got to look at the opinion polls to see that Reform, you know, their support has ticked up. They did pretty well in those two by-elections a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, there is definitely a gamble here. It's not all win here for the Conservatives. You know, they are, as I say, potentially bleeding support on their right flank, and this might not help.
If you look at the front, I think it's the front page of the Telegraph, it's certainly in the Telegraph, Nigel Farage has offered an olive branch to him, saying, come and join Reform, you would be welcome, actually it would be a better home for you. If he was to join Reform, would that send shivers down the back of the Conservative Party?
I think potentially it could. You know, I mean, I remember when way back before the Brexit referendum, when some Conservative MPs flipped to UKIP, you know, and that was a bit of a straw in the wind, and that certainly worried Conservative high command. And yeah, this would also not be great. I mean, considering that just last month, Lee Anderson was still the deputy chairman of the party. You know, if he was to then defect to someone else, then, you know, that really would be quite a seismic event. Now, I wouldn't rule it out. He has spoken before, Lee Anderson, about how he allegedly has been tapped up by Reform. He says he was offered money to switch to Reform, and
which Richard Tice denies.
Which he denies, exactly, and he has thus far refused to do so. But now, if he's suspended by the party, he's officially sitting as an independent MP now. He may well decide to jump ship, and it would be quite a remarkable moment, not least because Lee Anderson was once a Labour councillor, so he's been on quite a political journey. Well,
also, of course, it would give Reform UK its first MP.
It would, and, you know, as a symbolic moment, that would certainly be quite something. And not only that, you know, I know that the Conservatives are very worried about Nigel Farage. Now, you mentioned Nigel Farage there. I don't think he's going to stand for Parliament, but just by being there, by being a figurehead for the Reform Party, for perhaps leading their general election campaign, then that would really, really send shivers down the spine of Conservative Party bosses. So yeah, very interesting times ahead, I think.
And now, Labour is not out of the woods here at all. We saw what I thought were disgraceful scenes in the House of Commons the other day with this amendment put forward by the SNP. Now, the SNP, I think, were playing quite clever politics by proposing that motion. We know Lindsay Hoyle has got into a lot of trouble over that. Now, the SNP are proposing that amendment again. What, in your opinion, what is the reason for doing that?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, that they want to do it because they wanted to expose the divisions of the Labour Party the last time. They obviously were unable to do that because of the way things turned out, and Lindsay Hoyle accepting that Labour amendment rather controversially. So they didn't get the opportunity to expose those divisions, which do undoubtedly exist within the Labour Party. So this is them wanting to have basically a second bite of the cherry, because you've got to remember, up in Scotland, Labour and SNP are pretty much neck and neck, and all the polls seem to suggest that Labour could take an awful lot of SNP seats at the general election. So they want to hammer home these splits within the Labour Party. I think that explains why the SNP were so angry last week, not just because their motion hadn't been voted on, but because they had been frustrated in their attempt to try and highlight those splits.
So if they bring that amendment in, then the right of reply would also naturally go to the government. The SNP then may well expose, as you say, the divisions within the Labour Party. Now, when you look at their wording, the SNP, their amendment calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Labour is calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire with two caveats. Firstly, that Hamas lays down its weapons and the release of those 134 hostages. The Conservatives have a slightly different message tonally: immediate humanitarian pause and a permanent sustainable ceasefire. Starmer could be in big trouble, I think, in that vote.
Well, he could be, and obviously, given the mess that Lindsay Hoyle made of it last week and the criticism that he received, he now going forward, I think, is going to have to almost overcompensate to show that he's not biased towards the Labour Party, because don't forget, you know, his own personal position is still not completely safe. And yeah, you're right. I mean, how Labour then vote in that debate would be fascinating. I mean, Labour did think that they had really avoided potential problems last week, the way it turned out, but clearly if the SNP want to bring this forward, and Lindsay Hoyle has also said that he would like to facilitate such a debate taking place, then that obviously just brings all these troubles up to the fore again for the Labour Party. I think one thing to remember is the three parties aren't actually that far apart on the issue of Gaza. They all want a ceasefire. It's all on semantics. It's all on wording exactly how that ceasefire looks, how it comes about, and what happens next. But again, it's all about politics between the parties at Westminster, with a general election looming.